Welcome everyone to the Voice of Terminus show number 53. Dungeons is our topic today, and I'm joined by Lexa. Say hello, Lex.
Hello, folks.
And we have Joshua with us. Say hello, Josh.
Hey guys.
And before we kick it in, I want to apologise for last week to the YouTube chat out there. We had trouble relaying chat to our broadcaster, but now we've fixed it, and we have YouTube, Beam and Twitch chat linked together, so we will see everything that's going on in chat and we'll be able to respond to you guys as well. So let's go and talk about dungeons, and before we get into the grindy discussion of it, I want to ask you two which dungeon is one of your most memorable and why. And we'll start with you, Josh.
I think in EverQuest 2, my dungeon run with dragons in Vision's Peak is always very memorable in being very epic and very expansive in its makeup, and the way they approached the various dragons. It was really wow, basically factor, and yeah, spent many hours dying in there, and it was all good fun. So yeah, that was it.
What about you, Lex?
Well, because I've been around for way too long and played too many games, there's a lot of them. In EverQuest 1, you've got your fear and your hate raids. Yeah! Those were hardcore back in the day. In EverQuest 2, I had a lot of fun in Fallen Gate. Met a lot of good people there. I could go on and on and on, because when you find yourself in a very fun dungeon with fun people, you tend to go back over and over and over and just play it to death. So there's a lot for me, but those are the big ones.
Cool.
Nice.
So let's get into the discussion itself. And I hope my volume's fine because I haven't changed anything. Anyway, as we know, in Pantheon, most dungeons, almost all of them, will be non-instanced. There's a lot of pros and cons towards non-instance versus instance and vice versa. And let's go and talk a bit about what these pros and cons are.
Well, let's see. I can vouch for developer side of things. Obviously, open world, so non-instance and all that is a tad easier.
Mm-hmm.
There's less things to worry about.
Well,
But I mean, you've got your standard kind of pros and cons for players. With open world, the con would be that you're technically competing.
Mm-hmm.
A pro would be you can get help if you need it, and the world feels more immersive. For instance, there's never any competition. Everything is readily available for you in your own little version. Mm. But at the same time, it feels like the standard script over and over again.
Yeah. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, just definitely from a player perspective, I think instancing has its weaknesses in the sense that if you really are battling to find players, or to group with, you will never be able to run those type of instances and get the loot that you want. But you could probably lower your group to maybe 4 people and still go into an open zone, still being able to maybe slowly pull the mobs that you want and creep slowly through it. So yes, there is definite benefits to the open zoning versus the instancing, and vice versa. As Lex says, instances, well, it's your own little slice of heaven. You don't have to worry about anybody else coming in and kill stealing your stuff. So yeah.
Well, it all comes down to the community at the end, talking with each other, socializing, talking about kill stealing, etc. And we already know that to some point, story driven, there will be instancing, which is perfectly fine. I'm fine with that. I think that's the best way to go about it, because we're all trying to tell our own little story when we do our storyline driven quests, and it should be to some point be instant, be at the end of an epic timeline, etc. I'm perfectly fine with that. But in the general goal with having it non-instance, this also opens up the possibility of having huge dungeons to run through, because that's also that's the downside of it. If a dungeon isn't designed right, non-instance, size-wise, etc., it becomes overcrowded quickly, overpopulated, and becomes a battle for who gets there first. And that's one of the downsides of the non-instance version compared to it being instance. And
everyone needs room to play.
It's all about resources.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's go and talk about some of our questions. So first off, should dungeons be static and level or be more dynamic? And the question here is intended to mean basically, should we see variations throughout the dungeons level wise? We already know that in Haunier's Cave, as you further go down, the level raises up. It gets the level of encounters is higher. Would you like to see that generally, or should it be variations? Should you have dungeons that are static, that are only linked to a certain level, and so forth? I think a good mix of it being static and being more dynamic is a good approach to go for, depending on what they're trying to do, what kind of dungeon it is, etc. What's your take on it, guys?
My take is a mix. I think that open dungeons should have a mix of levels running through it. And yeah, generally, as you go down to the lower levels of a dungeon, it should get harder, and the mobs should get higher level type mobs. But there's nothing stopping certain high level mobs roaming around and surprising groups at higher levels. And therefore, it's making it quite interesting. Instead of the same old boring mobs at the upper levels thinking, oh, these are the guys we can just close our eyes and just cruise through. No, you have to watch out for tougher groups to come along as well.
Yeah, for me, it's the case of if it's instanced, there's no reason to add any variation. So it's static. And to me, static is boring. I've seen too many. When you have open dungeons, there's every reason to make multiple levels, even just rooms that are a little tougher. Because, let's face it, we'll just take like a standard fantasy novel. You don't have your elite warriors walking around, just in the courtyards. You have them in the center of your stronghold, guarding your leaders. So, to me, that always made sense, especially in open world dungeons. Your stronger guys are going to be more towards the important parts of this area, and it adds a certain level of stress to know that the farther you go in, the harder it's going to get, and you need to try and find your nice balance between difficulty and reward. It makes you feel more like you're on an adventure versus you're just running through a script.
Taking it
just to add to that. Yeah, I just want to add to that as well. I think exactly what Lex is saying is that at any one time, I'd love to go into an open dungeon where it's large enough that you can be on multiple levels and you can possibly run into 8, 9, 10 different groups camping certain spots throughout that dungeon, based on their level of difficulty and the challenge that they want. And the open dungeon has the means to accompany that.
Yeah. Before we move on, I know I'm sorry. Sorry. See, here's another thing with having multiple groups in an open world dungeon. The great thing is that every now and then you're going to find yourself in the presence of a higher level person, a cleric or some kind of buff class. It just walks around and go, hey, buff. Hope you guys have fun. They're almost like ambassadors to the game. They make people feel like the community is warm and inviting, and they're here to help you versus I'm just here to have some fun, and then I'm going to, unsubscribe and leave 2 months down the road.
Yeah.
So it does nothing but help the game in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. What I wanted to add as well is we also know that behaviors will come into play. AI behavior, so that's going to also add to the challenge. But the one thing I want to, what I like to see, what I want to see when we are non-instant dungeons is, I want to go in there every time not knowing what I'm about to expect. Not running into that area, turning left, and I know exactly, boom, if I pull that group there, that's going to happen. If I go carry on down the path, do this, do that. I hope that with the AI behaviors, this spices things up, makes it more of a challenge every time you go in there, because that's what it comes down
Absolutely.
to. We're all looking for challenge. Obviously, going through learning the different AI mechanics, etc., behaviors, after some point in time, the 10th, 15th, 20th time of running through there, knowing it off the back of your head, you're going to get to a point where you do know this dungeon fairly well. That's perfectly fine. But along that time, during that period of time I'm going through there, I still want to know every time I go in there, are we going to be safe? Are we going to be endangered? We have to constantly look out to what we're doing.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. And
sorry, just to add to that,
go ahead.
I mean, one of my nicest experiences was back in EverQuest, in Oasis, where we were camping bandits in the sands there, and we had a druid that was buffing us on the top over there. Always remember this druid, and they would just keep us alive. We were not. They were white mobs for us, and yellow, so it was great. But the thing that really got to us is that we had to keep a lookout because of the giants that were walking around. A giant could easily intercept us and wipe us out. So you had that constant looking about and danger that could spring up and kill you in one shot. And that's the type of feeling you should have in these type of dungeons.
To answer your question, DT Swish, I'm guessing that there will be different sizes of dungeons available to us. I don't think they're going to be limited on size, and we have a few ideas as well to expand on that, but that will come a little later. One question we have inside these dungeons, if we think about epic proportions, epic sizing of dungeons, should there be unlockable travel nodes within these dungeons? This is a question that Josh came up with. We were talking about this off the air, and my stance on it is it all depends basically on what kind of dungeon it is, to offer me this possibility to have a travel node within the dungeon. If it's a basic dungeon that has a normal mining shaft and normal encounters in there that don't have magical beings in there, etc., then I feel basically, it should be a matter of getting in and making your way back out. And we already know that some dungeons will have multiple entrances and exits inside the dungeon, so that's another thing to take into account. But I'm kind of like, it depends. A nice mix. Some dungeons yes, some dungeons no. That's my point on it. What about you guys?
All right. My thinking was along those lines. Simply, we know that these open dungeons are going to have multiple levels to them. So you fighting on one day, traveling down 3 to 4 levels to get back to your level itself that you are comfortable with can be a yawn. But it would be great if you could have access to maybe a shaft that you could possibly go down that was guarded by ogres that you befriended within that dungeon at a certain level, and they allowed you to come and go based on maybe a token that you have for them. So this would allow you quicker access down to maybe the 3rd level of that dungeon, saving you hassles.
Yeah. See, this is where everyone boos and throws tomatoes at the screen, as I am against it 100%, and I'm going to be the first person that when I die, I'll be complaining that there should be, and I realize this, but I'm firmly against it simply because without the threat of something detrimental in a dungeon, like even if it's just travel time to get back to where you were, there's really no incentive to fight on even harder, and that's what bugs me in a lot of games nowadays, because there's no death penalty at all. So when I'm in a dungeon, and we say we can handle 2 safely because we've got a crowd controller, but we pull 4. Well, all of a sudden, your heart starts racing, your palms start sweating. You're like, oh god, oh god, oh my god, we're gonna, oh god, oh god, pull him over there, oh my god, and people just start really having an intense moment, and those moments are what build your experience in the game, because 10 years down the road, you'd be like, remember that time when we were in the Tower of the Mad Magician and all this stuff came and we were just like, oh my god, but we still made it, and everyone's gonna be like, yeah, I remember. No, those are the memories that live on.
Yeah, I just find that if you are going to be you are going to go get your corpse out and you are doing a corpse run or something like that, and you have to now travel down 3 levels of dungeon again to try and get to your corpse type of thing. If they have this in there, people are going to get so fed up. Going to get so annoyed.
Not necessarily, because EverQuest was like that, but that was an opportunity for communities and friends to come together to help each other.
That's what it comes down to. Those are the challenges of the game. I get where you're coming from. To some point, I can understand that, especially if it's a large, massive dungeon. Maybe for a short period of time, an unlockable to go back down there or something within the dungeon, like a portal that you can access. But it should be something that's very hard to achieve. It should be something that's very hard to achieve if they do it at all. Because to be honest with you, corpse runs, that's the most one of the most memorable things I can actually think about back in my early days of EverQuest 2. The first time we died in Stormhold, everybody got their ass kicked by the group leader for not paying attention. We had to go back down there. We were at the bottom level of Stormhold. It took us hours, days to get there. And yeah, it's a challenge, but it keeps you on your toes. That's what it's about. That's why we want this challenge back in. That's why we're looking forward to Pantheon, because people are going to be on their toes constantly, because they know if we die, stuff's going to happen. There's going to be punishment, and it keeps us on our toes. And and corpse runs are actually quite fun.
They certainly can be. I mean,
they can.
I've met some very interesting people on corpse runs. I mean, when I was leveling up my raid warrior in EverQuest 1, I died in Valktor's Labyrinth. Who remembers that? And a really, really awesome monk actually left his group to help me out. I offered him money. I offered him all this stuff. He wouldn't take it. But we sat and chatted for like 2 hours. And, I mean, I lost touch with him over the years. But for probably a good 5 years, me and him were very, very good friends. All because I died and asked for help.
That's exactly one of the points to it as well. Through this so-called, or let's call it punishment that you have. Yes, it might seem at first annoying. Yes, it is annoying. You died. You fought your way all the way down to the bottom level. You died. Bummer. You got to go all the way back down there. It took you hours to get down there. But at the end of the day, like Lex already said, you start, socializing, collaborating with people, talking to people, engaging with people. You build bonds, friendships. This other group might come along and start helping you get down there, etc. It's a good way to get the socializing aspect of the game going. Get us talking with each other.
And just to rest assured people that are watching, when we're talking like, corpse runs and stuff, we don't know what's going to happen.
Yep.
But the thing is, what we're trying to actually get across here is that dying needs to have some kind of penalty.
Meaning, yeah.
Yeah, there needs to be a reason that I don't want to die. We're not saying that it's a case of you die and you're cut off at the hip. Because like how EverQuest did it, you're completely naked, 400 zones over, and you know what I'm talking about. Well, at least a lot of you old-timey queuers do. We're not saying it needs to be that harsh. We're just saying that there needs to be a reason that I don't want to die. Whereas a lot of games now, it's like you die. Oh well, you just start over.
Let me just quickly bring this into chat as well, because it's definitely a valid question. So, chat, please give us your opinions. Yes, no, maybe, whatever. Keep it short as possible. Should there be unlockable travel nodes within dungeons? Give us your insights in chat as well, because we're definitely interested, and we'd like to get your feedback on that. To some merit, that it's I'm kind of in the middle of it. I can support it, but at the end of the day, it has to depend, and if so, it has to be something very hard to achieve, as far as I'm concerned, to support.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And the point being, it isn't just something that you like. Oh, put your hands around this globe thingy, and it teleports you out, and you can teleport back to that same spot. No, it's something that you need to earn, maybe through befriending. Maybe it needs to be. Yeah.
I'll say, let me revise this just a little bit. I mean, I don't want it, but I'd be okay if it was something that was limited use that I had to earn in order to use it. So, like you could say, like a little glowy orb thing, but it takes like the tooth of this dragon to use it or whatever. The chances are I'm not going to have a lot of those. I'm going to be very cautious when I need to use them. I think I could be okay with that. But I'm still going to stick with no. If I had a choice between yes and no, I'm just going to say no.
Because it's like some people in chat already say, it all depends on the dungeon for me. Like I said, if it's a magical dungeon that we're in, where there's a lot of magic going on, I can understand there being travel spires, etc. maybe throughout there. That's perfectly fine. I have no problem with that. But in normal dungeons where there isn't that higher magic and stuff like that, then no, I have to go and make my way. If it's a normal mine shaft, then hey, or a normal mine or something, or a labyrinth, I have to go through that and deal with it. Because a nice mix, maybe, a good mix of having some dungeons that have travel nodes, some that don't, etc. I think a nice mix would kind of spice it up.
You know, I mean, that Tower of the Mad Magician, that might make sense, because who knows what's going to be there. But in a place like Amber Fate, where it's all cliffs and ice, I mean, it doesn't make sense to have it here.
Exactly.
So I would say if it's something that VR is considering, please consider carefully.
Yeah.
Don't just throw it in.
So this brings us on to a related question to this. Should there be safe zones, area spots within the dungeons, for you as a group or as a raid to safely park your characters when taking a break, etc., or when, and this also relates to a way to actually overcome, similar related to the travel node of things as well. Let's say you're in a big dungeon, and it's a raid dungeon, for instance, and it's huge. There was a discussion in our Discord yesterday about having huge dungeons for, let's say, raids, for instance, is kind of against the whole procedure and makes raiding less fun because they are so huge. So basically, if you're in there for 3-4 hours, you only got halfway through the dungeon, you're gonna have to camp yourself somewhere, and then the next day or the week later or whatever, when you go and raid there again, you got to go through the whole stuff again. So before you get to the final end of that raid or whatever, it's going to take you weeks, maybe years, even to get to that final encounter. So that's why there was the question of, that's why we brought this question, should there be safe areas, safe spots where you could maybe camp yourselves and log back in at some point?
I'm going to say yes, but I'm not going to say for camping purposes. I'm talking rest stops. So that you can rebuff, replenish, take a chance to rest and get a breather. Go to the freaking bathroom, you know? I'm not talking long-term safety here. I'm talking like you get 5-10 minutes, because there's still going to be patrols, like say it's an empty room. There's a patrol that walks around the room once every 10 minutes. And if you're in the room, he'll come in the door and start wailing on you, okay? I'm cool with that. And I'm not cool with people being able to camp out like in the boss room and then camp the boss. You know, I'm not cool with that. But I do feel that there does need to be areas, at the very least, like say hallways where there's only one patrol, he's on like a 3-minute timer. And so when you kill him, it does give you a place to stop and refresh. That's what I'm talking about in terms of safe zones. Not something where you are forced to continually move forward all the time. Because if you're in combat all the time, a lot of you old timers, again, know that gets tiring pretty quick when your clerics are constantly at 20% mana going, oh my god, hurry up. That's why when I shake my head yes, that's why I'm saying yes, that we need just rest stops.
But then it also leads to another question. Would you allow a group or player to actually camp out at a rare spawn point and then come back every 6 hours to check whether they can actually take on that mob if it's respawned? I don't think that should be allowed, because that's the same thing as camping for 6 hours in a spot and not having any risk in it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. If you're camped out for, say, 2 or 3 hours, then it should just pop you back to wherever the beginning is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In my opinion. And I'm the guy who's going to get hit by that pretty hard, so I'm kind of kicking myself in the butt.
It should, camping a boss room shouldn't technically be possible. I mean, it's the boss room, man. You log in there, boom, he should smack you on the back of the head and knock you out. Boom, done.
Right.
That should be a dangerous place.
Right, and again, to step back again to like the static or more dynamic, the boss should always be located in the same room, because think about it. If you're always in the same room and you're constantly getting your butt smacked down, eventually you'll be like, you know what? Let's find a more defensible position because this ain't working. You're going to move around. It's just the way it is.
What about having to put down like a campsite or something like that?
A defendable campsite, depending on what you have, I guess.
Yeah.
It would be an interesting mechanic, perhaps to increase to lower your downtime, or to provide a unique buff. But something like that might have to depend on some sort of crafting, like someone actually has to craft a tent, craft a campsite, whatever. Because I think that would be a nice way for crafters to actually participate and provide a benefit to adventurer groups.
Well, that brings us on to the next question. We already posted this on Twitter as well, so we're going to go and talk about this a bit more in depth. Would you like to see puzzles, crafters, locks, traps, etc. play a major part within dungeons? That's been one of my most fondable experiences in the later EQ2 dungeons, was a lot of traps, a lot of locks, a lot of puzzles to accompany us as a group along, to be able to expand throughout the dungeon. I mean, when Unrest came out in EverQuest 2 with their expansion, it was phenomenal. Having to find the chess piece, put it on the chessboard to unlock that door, to send up the food chain, to activate the NPC up there, etc. Those were one of my most fondable memories that I have on a dungeon. And I thought, this is fantastic. It was fun. It was engaging. It's not just about going in there, rushing through, beating down everybody. So what's your thoughts on this, guys? Would you like to see something like this happen, where you have crafters play a role, puzzles, traps, locks, etc.?
I'm for it, definitely. I think that crafters should play a role in dungeons, as well as locks and barriers that specific classes should be able to use their unique abilities to get through. Puzzles, so long as puzzles are not a key aspect of a dungeon, maybe they provide an extra treasure room or something like that. I can just see people just getting very frustrated. And I'm not saying make it easy, but if it becomes a key part of their momentum forward, it may be an issue.
See, I'm going to take from an experience here, because my wife is also an MMOer. She loves the puzzles. I'm not smart enough for them. I'm just a dumb tank. So while I don't enjoy the puzzles, I do recognize that some people do really enjoy them. So I think it would do those players a disservice not to have them in. Crafters should play a part in dungeons. Absolutely. A crafter needs to be able to provide services to the party. Otherwise, like they've already said, that crafters are going to have special areas inside of dungeons, Amber Fate being a prime example. So why wouldn't they provide a service to the group while they're adventuring? Otherwise, you're just escorting them up, and it feels like you're walking a kid up to the forge so that he can do his thing. And you're like, okay, there you go, you're done. Go back home now. Let the big boys play. It doesn't feel right. Locks and traps, for the love of God, yes. Please make there be a reason that I should bring a rogue or some kind of trap detector or disarmer. Please, for the love of God. I am so tired of seeing rogues, just like crafters, kind of being left to the wayside. Rogues went from being this, if you're in a sketchy area, I got your back. They went from that to being, I just poke things in the back and I do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
They're just, it feels like they were cut in half. So bringing traps back in, bringing locks, and please make picking locks fun.
Yeah.
Please. Hell, make disarm traps fun, please.
Yeah, and not just the poison dart type things. Let's hope they are quite unique type traps as well. Fire, ice, and all types of things that you can be affected with.
Well, let's go and talk a bit about this lock picking and stuff, because we actually went on and furthered this a bit. Let's say, for instance, now you forgot your key to access a certain door. Now, how are you going to go about this? There's three things you can technically do. Have to travel back and get the key, so you go back all the way to your town, wherever you left it in your inventory, you go and get it, or find another. Or what about adding mini games to lockpicking? So you have a chance within the group to either go and forcefully knock this door down. You can have a magical barrier, so a magician, if you have a mage in the group, basically, he would have to go and try and balance out the magic force field or whatever, and then the assassin would come in and try and lockpick this. What about something like that? Adding something like that to it, and basically, if you fail, you're out of luck. You have to go get the key, but it's an option that you have. It's something to do. It's something else. It's spicy up and makes it
I think
fun.
there does need to be lockpicking minigames, and not just for lockpicking. Maybe disenchanting or something like that for the magic user, something where they can, like, say a magic barrier, and they can have a minigame to kind of get rid of it for X amount of seconds.
Yeah.
But in terms of actual keying, this, we're 2017. For the love of God, give me a key ring. Don't make me keep 45 keys in my inventory, because I'm the kind of adventurer that if there's a key, even if I don't know what it's for, I have it in my inventory. I mean, remember, okay, old EQers, Crush Bone. You remember those little slave keys? I guarantee you my old necromancer still has one on him to this day.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree with you totally. And the one thing that really, really bugs me is that things can be done based on brute strength. I see a comment over there about using a two-handed hammer to just smash a lock. Believe me, it should be a valid option, but it shouldn't be the only option. And it shouldn't. That should also have a fail rate as well. You should mess the lock up. You should not be able to enter that door if you do not succeed with your strength roll on that type of thing, or your hammer should have a chance of breaking because all those type of things.
And it comes down to what kind of sealment is there. Is it magically sealed on top of it? Is it just a normal lock, or is it magically sealed, etc.? Those should all come into account.
Yeah, exactly.
I just got this image of a paladin taking a two-handed mallet, hitting a lock, and then vibrating like in the cartoons, like.
Exactly.
And I'm sitting there going, "Sissy."
All right, so
but I do agree. There does need to be, like, it shouldn't be like, oh, you can just break it open. Breaking it open should be like, a Hail Mary in American football. There's a very slim chance of it working, but it might just work if you're in a pinch.
Just imagine it. You're 6 guys in this dungeon. You're standing in front of this door. You got a scar in the group. You split yourselves up. You got one at the back holding its legs. You got 2 on each side holding him up and using him as a battling ram. It should be an option. It should brute force to unlock that door. Should be an option.
Yeah, but I mean,
Oh,
if you
that's
remember
funny.
if you remember the door for Amber Fate, there's no way you can force
Yeah,
that. No way.
definitely.
Yeah, sure.
It's like trying to take a hammer and tear down a freaking skyscraper. It's just not happening. Not in your lifetime. So there does need to be areas where it's like that shouldn't be an option. But the same thing goes if, like, say, the magic barrier thing. I think magic casters should have a chance to disenchant that or disrupt it for a short time. But they wouldn't obviously, or maybe they could do something with a standard mechanical lock. Whereas it could just be a case of, like the rock, paper, scissors. Rogue beats mechanical lock. Mechanical lock beats wizard kind of thing. And the strength guy just has a very slight chance to take down them all. Yeah. But it's so ridiculously low, you'd rather have your enchanter try first.
Yep, definitely. So let's talk quickly about the keys. So for me, this depends on the dungeon, what it is, but should keys be a one-time use, usable only during a dungeon, or once found, unlimited use? And obviously, to relate to your idea as well, to the keychain, instead of having thousands of keys in the inventory, for the love of God, yes, give us a little keyring where I have all the keys on there that I carry along with me as a additional pouch. Not
if you really want to make me happy, I say, if you really want to make me happy, add a little keyring to my character's belt with keys on it and jingles. Just very, very low, not too much. And then I'd run around town naked, but my keyring.
So what do you say, guys? For me, this is basically depends on the dungeon. One-time use, usable only during the dungeon, and once found, unlimited. It depends on what kind of key it is, what it unlocks for me in general. I think I like to see a nice mix of different keys.
I agree wholeheartedly. Like, say you get like this big metal antimantium key. Well, that's obviously not breaking, so you could probably use that a few times. But say you get like a brittle bone key.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be one use, but it might just be a chance to break. And then, because every time you walk through the door, you're going to be like, oh, dear Lord, yes! It's just one more added little you don't know that sometimes you're going to be frustrated, sometimes you're going to be ecstatic. I think would go a long way.
So, related to keys again and accessing, should access to unlocked areas, rooms, be accessible for others out of the group? So let's say, for instance, you're in this dungeon, you've unlocked this door, you go through. Should others be able to follow?
Yeah, you've basically camped a rare mob for like about 2 hours. You finally get the guy to drop that key. You go there, I've got access into this new area now. As you open it up, another group just goes, thank you very much, and just waltzes through as well with you. What the hell? All that effort, and everybody just waltzes through.
Well,
it's frustrating if you don't know the people and they haven't even bothered asking. But I guess you're out of luck then.
Well, it's like, let's take, for example, I'll use the same example, but I'll do instance and open. Say there's a part of a dungeon where you go in, and it turns into like this gauntlet event, It's you're in a fighting pit with your group, and they keep throwing waves at you for so long, and then at the end you get a prize. Open world, that becomes very difficult to control. People can rig the system by not being in the group and messing with it, or they can basically deny you your prize. So, and something like that, you don't want that to be open world. But there's no problem with putting an instance if you have a very, very long cooldown on it, or maybe it's not available all the time. Maybe you have to kill some guy to trigger it, and even then it still might not work. But something where it's a challenge for a single group within a dungeon, I'm cool with that being instanced, but it has to be like, one room, maybe 2 room or 3 room, just something very small, something that a single group can go in and have a very, I'm just going to say intimate challenge.
So
but they'll just, the minute it's done, they turn around and go back.
So let's kind of skip this question and went on to the next question I was going to bring up, just to clarify everybody. So I'll go and bring up that question as Lex already kind of talked about it. So we talked about, should there be instance areas within an open dungeon only accessible for your group, for maybe a story-driven quest or a story-driven encounter, etc., etc., or because you've gained a certain faction or whatever, or you've unlocked a certain item, etc. That's the question behind it, and I'm kind of like all for that. I would like to see a mix, a good mix. Some instancing be available as well, especially for the story-driven side of it, because that's my story or our story as a group we're telling.
Yeah.
I don't want other people to, get involved in my story or our story that we're currently doing. This is our time. This is where we are writing history within the world of Terminus and within this dungeon. Boom. And I like to see some dungeons have, instanced areas and some not.
Yeah, sorry. Aren't you glad it's my last show? It keeps messing everything up. God.
So, what about you, Josh? What's your take on instancing within the open dungeons?
I think there should be a mix at times. I agree wholeheartedly that story-driven content becomes a lot easier to do with partially instanced areas within an open dungeon, and to a degree, maybe that will resolve certain key areas as well. That if you do need keys and they do drop for you, then those areas become open, but everybody else sees a door there maybe, and going forward. So yeah, I do think that some instancing will be a good thing.
Okay, so this next one's going to bite some people, feel bitter in the back of your throat a bit, etc. But it has to be talked about. It has to be talked about.
We're doing it, huh?
This is actually a different question, Lex. I don't think you're should dungeons have player restrictions, as we've seen in multiple other games? Level restriction, gear restriction, environmental restriction. Should that be part of the player process to enter a dungeon? We all know that some games have a gear check. Some games, even EverQuest 2 now has a gear check per se called Resolve. Should that be something that should be in? And I definitely have to say, from my perspective, no, it shouldn't. It kind of destroyed the whole point of grouping. I mean, we have trouble still trying to get a group together to go and do a certain dungeon because some people in our group or in our guild or whatever do not meet certain requirements. Should we all be punished for that?
No, I agree with you. I do think environmental restrictions may be a challenge. Sure, you can go into those different areas of the dungeon. Maybe it's eternal darkness at level 7 of a dungeon, or it's full of lava. So yeah, definitely you're going to sweat your ass off and possibly die from heat exhaustion if you don't have the right gear. But yeah, maybe not so much the other areas, but definitely environmental restrictions.
Yeah. And that's something that inside the dungeon that should happen, though. It shouldn't be a requirement from the get-go. You can go into that dungeon regardless of the environmental restriction or not. It's obviously, like you said already, going to be a challenge for you and your group to overcome that because, this player here doesn't meet the environmental requirements, is getting a lot more damage, so the healer's going to have to pay a little more attention to him as well to keep him up, and etc. And obviously, what's going on in the front as well. So I don't mind having those kind of restrictions in there. It makes for challenge. That's what it's all about. We're all looking for a game that's challenging and
Correct.
Makes us work together as a team and think about what we're doing, where we're going, and how we're going to go and accomplish our goals that we're trying to achieve within the dungeon, etc. I'm all for that. But restricting people purely based on level or on gear is a game destroyer, as far as I'm concerned.
100%. If somebody wants to walk in there with a piece of paper on the front of their chest, well, go for it. Yeah.
To get into a door, the only requirement is that if it's locked, you need to have a way to open it.
Yeah.
Obviously. But, I don't have to wear certain clothes to get in my front door. I don't have to be super experienced to open up my back door, It's It always seems ridiculous.
Your wife might tell you to take off those dirty shoes before entering.
That's after I enter. Where she's like, why didn't you take those off? But the level, gear, and environmental should be challenges contained within the dungeon. It shouldn't be requirements to enter the dungeon. Because I know it's not going to seem like a very smart idea, but you do kind of want these low-level guys to poke their heads into these places that are just crazy, because that gives them something to aspire to. So they're like, you know what? I'm going to play again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, so that I can level up and I can get into Amber Fate, because that place looks amazing.
And one thing, I've witnessed, especially in other games, is I sometimes ask myself, with these gear restrictions and level restrictions, etc., we've witnessed it ourselves, me and Josh, trying to group up and go and do the first tier of dungeons in the new expansion. You get kicked out because you don't reach certain requirements. You can't do DPS, you can't do this. The question is, how am I even meant to go and get this gear if I can't even go in this dungeon to get the gear?
Correct.
It kind of beats itself up. The whole point. Take that level 10 dude with you. Help him get the gear. Socialize with him. Make him a better player.
This is where the open dungeon design for Pantheon is actually going to excel. Because if they'll say, you can get, maybe not 100%, but you can get enough gear to kind of, on the first floor, to kind of make it so you can survive a little bit easier on the second floor, and so on and so forth going down. Until you start hitting the places where there's huge jumps between them. In which case you're like, well, let's go to this other place and fill in those other slots, But the dungeon, if it's going to be large, like these mega dungeons, basically that they're saying, they need to help build you up and help train you. They don't just throw you in. You can't do it. Well,
exactly.
That's almost a slap to the face.
Exactly, and to be honest, it destroys creativity. I mean, can you imagine the unique type of ideas that people will have to try and get to those lower levels if they're not geared for it?
I'm going to close my eyes. I'm just going to run. Show me if I hit a wall.
I'm a big fan of doing dungeons with under the recommended players. I love duoing. I love trioing. And there have been games where I'll be. Me and my wife will play key roles, tank and healer, and then a buddy of mine will be playing the game, and he'll be the DPS. And is it slow? Yeah, but it's a crazy challenge. And when we beat that last boss, we're jumping and screaming until she tells me to sit the hell down and calm down. But we're having a great time. It doesn't matter how fast we got through it. It doesn't even matter what we got. It's just the fact that we did something that we're technically not supposed to be able to do.
Exactly.
Related to actually touch on this though. Should there be maybe dungeon access requirements similar to what they had in multiple games, even in EverQuest 1, I think? You had to go through a quest series to unlock that dungeon. Would you like to see something like that happen to some point, maybe for a certain dungeon? Not all of them, obviously. I'd like to see variants, but have some dungeons have to be unlocked before you can go in there.
In some cases, that makes sense. We'll use Amber Fate as an example. Maybe it's, kind of like this lost legendary place, which I think it actually is, of the dwarves. So in order to get the key to open that door, you have to talk to this old guy who tells you to do this and do this, and that quest leads you to the point where you find the key on a dead dwarf or something. So that would be your requirement to enter. Correct. And that makes complete sense. If that quest is level 20, so be it. But there shouldn't be anything that's really saying, but obviously besides being a certain level to pick the quest up, that saying a level 5 couldn't come with you. They're still going to help, it just might not be very much, and that's part of your challenge. If you can't do it, then you just got to wait a little bit and try again,
Correct. And I agree. I think certain areas, there should be some excitement, some mystery to a dungeon to say, heck, I can't get into that door. I know it's got those strange runes around it, but I'm just going to keep persevering. It's always going to be sitting in the back of my mind. Why can't I get through that door? It's maybe because I need to speak to the right people and with a different language at some point, or I need certain faction to make them really friendly to get me access into those areas. So there should be some mystery and story around these type of areas as well, and it just also creates longevity for the game.
So, one more question before we get into the really cool portion of this stream, and before we even do that, I will do the quick disclaimer. Because we are on a Thursday show, we do not work for VR, are not paid by VR to do these shows. We're fans just like you, community people, supporting the game, waiting for Pantheon to be released, and trying to help entertain everybody out there, the community, get the ball rolling on ideas, talking, get the discussions going on the forums, and to even help VR think of some things that they might not have thought about, that might have a cool way to find themselves into the game. They might even be working on certain things that they are having tunnel vision on, and with us discussing all this and things that are said in chat, they might come up with the ultimate solution at the end, and hopefully, you know, that's what we're here to do, is have fun, entertain you guys, and discuss all of these mechanics and everything that's Pantheon related. So, this question now, before we get to the cool stuff, we do have something really cool, I swear. Should size matter within a dungeon? And this is a question from Josh related to your characters. So, picture yourselves now in Halnia's cave, walking through this really tight dungeon, and you've got this big fat ogre dude with you, and you now come to this really narrow pathway, and it's only about yay high. Should size matter? Should we have to find an alternative route to get there? Should we have the little halfling be able to go and squeeze itself through? Should we have to kick the dwarf through that little hole to get through? Should that matter? Should this be part of the experience as well? So Josh, relate us with your idea on this.
Well, the first thought that came into my mind in game itself is simply to have like a shrinking potions, for instance, for certain characters that you could have that could actually open up new areas of the dungeon. So like Alice in Wonderland, for instance, where she takes that potion and she can go into the new areas over there that she couldn't get before because of her size. So those type of things that could actually add a new dimension to your adventuring. And yes, ogres are fat.
Yeah, definitely. And we already know that there was already mentioned, I think in the first stream they were talking about, or the second one I think it was, they actually even mentioned shrinking potions themselves, so we could possibly see that, and I would definitely like to see that, because that's also part of the dynamics as well. Traps, locks, puzzles, crafters being thingy, and then having, like, you have to shrink. But let's not stop there. Why not have to turn the character into a two-dimensional piece of paper, really flat, and have to sliver through?
Oh, that'll be great, actually.
Just kidding, anyway, just joking. So let's get into the really cool stuff, unless Lex has something to add to this.
Well, all I can add is that to add that extra dimension to a dungeon technically makes a dungeon twice as large, or offers twice the content, or at least gives them the means to do that. No one's ever done it before. I think it's a great opportunity. But this also gives you an opportunity to really mess with traps. Maybe you have a trap that's, weight sensitive, where anything that's medium or higher triggers a trap, but a halfling or a gnome won't, There's a lot of fun things that people could do with this that I really think that VR, if they take anything from any of our shows, this is something that I think they should at least pursue and talk about, because there is a great number of benefits here and a lot of potential that no one else has tapped into yet.
Yeah, that Indiana Jones scene where only the penitent man shall pass, basically. So at certain level, that blade is going to come and lop off somebody's head. Things like that.
All right, so let's go and get into the really cool stuff now. That's going to blow everybody's mind. No, I'm just joking. There's actually I don't know if it's cool. We'll find out. Dungeon expanding ownership and encounters. And what we mean by that is, for dungeon expanding, for instance, adding new areas to the dungeon over time as expansions or updates, etc. Having faction basically relate to certain areas within the dungeon, and dungeon ownership, basically dynamic events within the dungeon. I think Lex put it the easiest way. You have ogres and goblins in the dungeon, and there's a dynamic event going on. They're fighting each other as well. But we'll get into that portion in a bit. We're going to start with the dungeon expanding idea, because this was Josh's idea. So Josh, elaborate a bit on your dungeon expanding idea.
Okay, well, I think we have touched on it briefly before as well. But the whole situation around, for instance, you come across a race that is specifically found within that dungeon. You befriend this race, and only through faction grinding with this race over time, you get to become good friends with them and allow you access into the king or whatever, or into their library, which opens up areas that only they have access to, which you'll never be able to access because it's blocked off through their city. So that area would then open up over time for you, and through later expansions as well.
Yeah, I like that idea. It kind of gives you a reason to not just assume every NPC is evil.
Correct.
Exactly.
Which really adds like a friend or foe element whenever you walk into some place new.
And generally expanding on a dungeon is also another good way to go about it. You know, for a small update to give us something else to do. You know, expand on the existing dungeons that you have there. It doesn't always have to be a complete new area, a complete new zone, a complete new this. It can be, you know, revisit the stuff that you already have created, add a bit of background to it. Spice it up a bit, change it off, you know, add a certain event that makes you have to go and change it, because that's what I look forward to the most, is, you know, having events change over time and seeing the changes, and maybe missing out on a change. You two guys might have been there from the start, lived through everything. I basically just get there now with the changes already made and hear cool stories from the cool guys that were there from day one.
Yeah,
I never witnessed that event. You know, we have world events in multiple games where it's always cool to remember back and hear people talk about it. And that's kind of the cool thing about it. You know, that's writing your own story there. You've gone through a different time period than I have.
Yeah.
And that's always really been cool to listen to.
Yeah, dungeons also suffer from the same problem as starter towns. Eventually become ghost towns and unused. It's wasted space, it's wasted potential. And even if it's only through expansions, that older dungeons, you know, maybe they add a new tunnel, they add a new wing, you know, whatever. It gives people a reason to go back. It breathes new life into this area that you've been to 100 times. Even if it's something like, oh, this dungeon's never been, no one's gone to it in 4 months. Well, then change it up. But like the dynamic events, that would also go a long way to making it feel alive, because you're no longer walking to this dungeon knowing exactly what's going to happen before you even get there.
Let's go talk a bit about this now, real quick, with the dynamic event ownership idea. So we've talked about this already, I think, on quite a few shows about dynamic events, etc., especially on the faction show. But this would also relate to the dungeons. Lex explained it best. You got ogres and goblins inside this dungeon fighting. Now you can add global events, dynamic events to this dungeon as well, where you as a group or the groups within that dungeon get to pick. You can either help the ogres, and by defeating the goblins you unlock the Goblin King, and vice versa. You decide to fight the goblins and get the leader from the orcs come out, and you get to fight him, etc. And this is kind of like a contested event. For instance, you got two different sides fighting either the orcs or the goblins, and you can have a third outcome. You can have the Rat King that's in there. You know the dungeon's full of rats. And if we don't make it, if nobody basically overcomes the mass majority of one side or the other, you could have a third event happen. You could have things like, let's say for instance, the orcs get wiped out. Now there's a mass majority of goblins within this dungeon. Now, generally, we all know when we go in there, this place is overrun by orcs. The next time you go in, boom, there's goblins everywhere. You might be on a quest step that requires you to do kill a certain orc in that dungeon, but he ain't around because they got wiped out.
Well,
now
he could be though.
But he could be.
He could be barricaded in a room or
Correct.
a wing of this dungeon. Who knows? There's a lot of potential again with dynamic events. And the thing is, like, since it's an open area, it needs to be treated like open area above ground as well. Not even though, because when you think dungeon, you think underground or in a dark, scary place. So it should be treated the same way. There needs to be dynamic events. There needs to be stuff that really mixes things up. In my opinion, if no one is online, things should still be happening in the world. This goes for just open world dynamic events, open dungeon dynamic events, whatever. So that when a player comes around, it might not be the same way it was last time he saw it, which makes them stop and go, I need to check this out, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And it's also another way of doing it. It could be GM events, it could be even VR-related events. You know, preparing for an update or something like that, or to spice things up. Boom, you know. You can have different things to go about. You know, you might get a global quest where it says, "Hey, everybody, go into Hownia Cave and wipe out those goblins because they're overrunning the place," and you get you know, whatever kind of reward and stuff. These are events that GMs can do, that VR can do, and it kind of spices things up. Because we might go in there, you know, needing. Okay, it might be annoying. You know, you got to go in there for a quest to kill a certain orc, but the orc's now not around because they got wiped out. Okay, so we've got to start killing goblins. But, you know, that's also entertaining and fun to do as well.
Yeah.
You know, it might be agonizing, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be bad, because you can still change the outcome again. You wipe out the goblins, the orcs start moving back in. So it's constantly shifting and changing, and that's for fun, dynamic things to happen.
Yeah, and it does also create that uniqueness in the items that you might be looking for out of that rare spawn. So it gets wiped out. So you wipe out the orcs, you wipe out the goblins, and the rats that are left over there. The Rat King moves in, or something like that. Yep. Now the Rat King's got a nice item that you might need as a mage. So it opens up a whole new area for you.
Yeah, and the key to dynamic events is really the dynamic part. I mean, not necessarily what happens, but the amount of opposition or challenge that you have ahead of you. So, like, say there's 40 people in this open dungeon. Well, then you need to provide those players with an adequate challenge during this dynamic event. It can't just be the same 10 goblins here, 10 orcs here, and they fight it out, and whichever side wins takes it over. You know, that's not an acceptable challenge unless there's only like 10 people or so in there. You know, but that's where you get into the hard part of dynamic events. I think Guild Wars 2 didn't do a whole lot right, but I think they got that part down pretty good. I mean, I've done dynamic world events by myself. I've done it with like 40 people, and it's always felt like there was some element of challenge there.
Yeah. Definitely. So, let's go and talk about next Thursday and what's to come. As you all know, people, this is Lex's last show for the next 4 or 5 weeks. He will be moving away and will be out of commission for a good 4 or 5 weeks. So you'll be entertained by me and Josh. The same goes for Kodiak. He is currently very, very busy work-wise. He's going to hopefully try and make it on the 23rd, the same as Lex will try and make it on the 23rd for our 1-year show. But next Thursday is our crafting discussion, which you'll be missing again, Lex.
Be on your phone.
What's next? What's next? Is Brad going to show up on this one? God.
Yes, I think it's the third time now, isn't it, Lex? That you missed the crafting show.
And I'm not leaving you. I'm just taking care of real life business.
Yeah. So that's what's going to happen next Thursday. We'll talk a bit about crafting. So if you've got any ideas, anything you want us to touch on in crafting, we also have to go and revisit some of the shows and see what we talked about so we don't overlap.
Yeah, that's one thing I would highly recommend. Just if they're all on YouTube, just go out there, check out our old ones. Maybe you'll see an old idea that we had that we forgot about. You bring it back up and we get a whole new branch of ideas.
Yep.
Sky's the limit.
And
well, except for me, because I won't be here.
Yeah, Lex won't be here. He won't be here. So that's next Thursday. If you've got any questions, guys, we'll give you like 2-3 minutes to type in your questions related to the show here today. Dungeons. Something that we might not have talked about that you want us to quickly touch on. So we'll give you time to type your questions in chat that we can talk about. There's one thing though we didn't talk about: respawn rate.
Yeah,
we didn't talk about that.
And that's also something on a developer standpoint. Is almost it's almost a developer's hell level. Too fast, it becomes too challenging. Too slow, and it's boring. You know, it's one of these things where it's probably going to require constant tweaking.
Yeah, and is it something that can be done based on the number of people that are in the actual open dungeon? So the more people, the higher the spawn rate, the less
it's absolutely
slow.
doable.
So yeah, all of those things need to be weighed up by the developers. And also the randomness of the mobs as well, the randomness of spawns. So you might have mummies, for instance, and not the daddies and the mummies, but mummies and the skeletons. And it could be just a specific time where you get different undead mobs that rise up at that time. So
get the core forest.
Yes.
You're running through there, and all of a sudden, all the baby mobs disappeared. You got these like level 30 or 40 undead. You're like, oh my god, save me!
Let me get out of here.
I sadly I got caught in one of those rollovers in that zone the first time I was there. Was I a little upset? Well, not really, because I was running for my life, and I'm just like, save me, Digital Jesus, save me!
It looks like there's no questions related to dungeons here.
Yeah.
Come on, guys. Obviously, we must have done a good job of covering everything. It all depends, DT Swish, what kind of MMO you're looking for. Are you looking for something to relate you to Pantheon, what it's going to be like? Are you looking for just something in general? There's so much you can try out. It all depends on what you're looking for. Are you looking for something to relate to Pantheon, to give you a slight approach towards it? What's your favourite dungeon of all time?
Plane of Fear! That's not really... Well, I guess it's a raid dungeon in a way.
For me, personally, it would have to be Stormhold in EverQuest 2. That was the very first one I ever entered in. And it's one I always will remember, even though it's pretty low level. Back in the day, it was really intense and really fun to go through.
Yeah.
What about you, Josh?
Mine was Vishen's Peak. I loved Vishen's Peak simply because it was one of the first raid zones that I ever got involved in. And we used to do that every night, and it used to be quite a rush when we took down a dragon for the first time. So, yeah, that was great for me.
Yeah. If people are looking for something that will lead you towards the Pantheon kind of mentality, I would actually recommend going to a number of games in succession. And these are all free, like going to the Project 1999 EverQuest 1 emulation server or something of that effect. And then kind of go up the ladder. Go to then go to the Vanguard emulator, which is still heavily in development, but it's playable. I would also recommend maybe the Warhammer Online emulator. Granted, they're not what they were. Some are better, in case of Warhammer. But they give you a good idea because a lot of these games are the founders of a lot of these ideas and a lot of these mechanics that a lot of us take for granted now, like dynamic open world events. Those didn't start with Guild Wars 2. Those started with Warhammer Online.
So there is one question, but I don't think we're going to touch on this one quite yet. How would you guys like to see boss loot handled? We talked about loot off the air, and that's something that deserves its own show by itself to talk about, because there are a lot of things to touch on. There's a lot of things to be careful about, vary about, etc. And that would be a show in itself, how to handle loot in general, boss loot, etc. What would you all want dungeons to? Would you want all dungeons to be actual dungeons, underground and stuff, or what else could you see? I could totally see going into a castle and taking it down. Yeah, definitely. A dungeon doesn't just necessarily have to be underground. It can be a ruin.
The word dungeon is very misleading.
Yes.
It can be open world. It can be. It could be just ruins within a desert itself. Could be clouds in the sky with something in there. Yeah, exactly, Marco. So it can be a multitude of things. A forest with trees and a maze in there.
Yep.
It's basically it's an area where multiple groups come together and run their way through there, and could meet up at one point in time, be it a castle, be it a dungeon in the ground, be it even a hole, you know?
Yeah, it would be very nice to see, well, because we have the climate and the environmental system with Pantheon, I think we're going to see dungeons like we've never seen before. Just in the raw challenge of them, which is going to be so refreshing, it's not even funny. We're seeing Death by Snoo about how two groups splitting up and helping each other. I would love that. I ran a guild in Star Wars: The Old Republic, and we talked about that for raiding all the time. Thought it would be amazing. It's very hard to pull off correctly because there's a lot of design elements that don't really work easily, we'll say. But, I mean, I would love to definitely see dungeons that, like, even just the atmosphere changes on, not necessarily level to level, but say you go down deeper, then it gets darker. Maybe there's some lava. You know, maybe there's crystals and quartz and amethyst coming out of the walls. And,
or it surprises you and it becomes a mushroom kingdom or something.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, but I know that in MMOs, dungeons, I think it's the right word, dungeons have become more of a misnomer than anything. Correct me if I'm wrong, my English sucks. But because when you think dungeon, you just think a challenging area of enemies, honestly. I think it's time to actually make that a little more broad in its definition in terms of MMOs, to be an area of challenge with hostile MMOs, environments, and other challenges.
We already talked about dungeons leading into different level of encounters. It all depends on what dungeon it is. A mixture. Some dungeons can have raid content, some others won't. A good mix of
Amber Fate will.
Yep, Amber Fate will. We already know that Amber Fate will have a good mix of grouping and raid content. In general, a nice mix depending on where you go. Not every dungeon should be the same. You know, there's nothing wrong with them having one that's just basically related to that level, and there's one that's related to multiple levels, and there's one that's related to all kinds of things. They don't all have to be the same. Spice them up, change them about, have a lot of variants. Some have traps, some don't. Some have magical barriers, the others don't. Some you can grab a scar by the legs and the feet and just ram a door and open it up. You know, variants. Just add variants to it. Give us all kinds of different options, and make sure that I think for all dungeons
And
AI
tested scarce
behaviors.
fly mode, and yeah.
AI behaviors are the most important thing within a dungeon. Period. The AI
Yeah.
behavior should always keep us on our feet.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if it's the same mobs, if they act differently, it doesn't feel like the same area.
Yep. So, with that, we will get Lexa packing.
Oh, trust me. My office has been in my basement for quite some time now. And just over this way, there's like almost to the ceiling of boxes. So, yeah. I've been packing.
So when is it? When are you finally like out of here?
I'm basically out of the house March 14th. I'm out of the state March 15th.
Nice.
We got to go through a lot of like utilities that have to be disconnected and then set up at the new home. And when we get down there, there's a lot of logistics and such that have to be taken care of. Moving sucks. I don't recommend you do it often.
Yeah, I've done it plenty of times. I've moved, I think, 14 times in my life so far. So I've got a lot of experience with it. So if you need any help packing, dude,
Come on over, free beer.
I know my way around that. I know how to load up a truck real good, get everything in there.
Yeah, free beer and pizza at Casa de Lexer.
So like I said, guys, next week is crafting discussion with Joshua and myself. And within 2 to 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, I'm being optimistic now. 4 to 5 weeks, we'll have Lexa back with us, and hopefully Kodiak will be able to find some time by then. Hopefully everything's good with him as well then. And then we'll have a full cast for you guys. So join us next Thursday, and hope you enjoyed the show. We will see you all next Thursday for the crafting discussion. Say goodbye to Lex for now. He will be missed. Drive safe,
Such
Lex.
Sweet lies.
So, say goodnight.
Good night, folks. Be safe.
Cheers,
and
guys.
I hope you have a wonderful time while I'm away. But don't get used to it.